Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Teens No Cap. I'm your host, Charity Chaffee. I'm a licensed mental health counselor specializing in the treatment of high-risk teens and their families, and I'm very excited to introduce you to my guest of the day. So I'm welcoming Gaby Diller, who is the founder and owner of Lotus Advocacy, serving students, families, and schools, providing special education, consulting, disability advocacy, and coaching for students. Lotus Advocacy aims to empower families, support students, and help develop special education success in schools. So I'm very excited to have Gaby on the show today, so I'm going to give her a second to just introduce herself, and then we are going to take off.
Lotus Advocacy. I started this company in 2020. I'm a former special educator and director and realized there were huge gaps between what parents knew, what students knew, and also incredibly overspent school districts. And I was like, great, I need to be able to do all the things I love about special ed on my own terms. And so then this business started. I have the opportunity to work with schools. I do teacher coaching, professional development, and then I get to be an advocate for families and students and do a small group of work one-to-one with kiddos, helping with transition planning for after high school and also a little bit of executive functioning coaching. All the things I love about special ed in one place without bureaucracy.
Well, the thing is, when we're thinking about women-led businesses, I love the fact that you basically created your favorite special interest in a company that you get to control. How cool is that?
1,000%. And for my own needs, I needed a schedule shift too. So I love to talk to students about that as well when I do transition planning, to say, hey, for my own medical needs that limited me, I also needed to make a change with schedules, the 5 a.m. wake up when it's dark and then you go home at 5 a.m. and it's dark, did not work for me either. So I also love to just talk to kids to say, hey, your careers can shift, and if you're somebody who is an entrepreneurial mind and wants to start a business, you can have flexible schedules and do what you need to meet your own needs.
I love that so much. It's so similar with my practice, because my practice is built on my love and desire to help support high-risk teens. And so when I think about the way that I have literally created my entire practice, it's all with them in mind, but they're the things that I love to do and the ways that I love to do therapy. And so it's I never have to go to work.
100%. And on top of it, you're a model too for kids around how you can find a career that, maybe joy is too high of a bar, but that works for you, and maybe joy is the goal down the road. So that's great.
So I'm so excited that you're here today, because we have so many things to talk about, and I actually feel we're more aligned, just given our quick convo, than we realize. Because one of the hills that I always say that I will die on is students being really a part and a collaborative component of their meetings. And there's a lot of people that don't agree with that. So you had said this idea of student-led IEP meetings, which I'm obsessed with, and I'm going to steal if you don't mind, because I've always really wanted teens to be a part of their IEP meetings and to really lead that. But I would love your thoughts on kind of what that means for you, and maybe how students and school districts can do that.
Totally. And I'll tell you the end goal, which is sort of elaborate, but ways that can be really efficient, something that can happen right away. So big picture, schools can choose to develop a 8 through 12 curriculum that guides students to be ready for senior year when they might actually legitimately run the entire meeting. So schools can, work with a transition specialist, they can work with a consultant like myself, or they can work with any specialist in the field of transition planning, or a special educator is interested to develop that curriculum. So in 8th grade, maybe it just starts with introducing yourself and introducing the team members, maybe saying what your goals are and your vision. And then in 9th grade, maybe you also practice advocating for what works in certain classes, what you like, what you don't like. And then in 10th grade, it becomes even more scripted. What are your specific goals that you want to achieve? How do you want to achieve them? And we continue to get warmer and warmer. Junior and senior year, we're starting to really iron out your vision, what you hope after high school. And then also your disability. Do you know what it is? Do you know what an IEP is? What's an accommodation? What's a service? And really kind of coaching students to be mini special educators so that by the time they're in senior year, they actually fully have internalized the document and they know how to run a meeting to go through each step. That's the long-winded, right? But there's quick little things that schools can do, and families, right? You can just meet with the kid for 5 minutes, 10 minutes before the meeting. Talk to me about your goals, what's working, what's not working. Write notes for the kid, or they write the notes themselves. You bring them to the meeting, they have their script, they get to participate, and that's at the very beginning. So everything surrounds around that student voice that they get to start with.
Yes. So to me, what that screams is like scaffolding.
100%.
Right? Because how can we
Totally.
expect kids and teens and young adults to be able to advocate and get their needs met and to understand how those things work if we are not helping to support them in the scaffolding as they learn and grow?
Of course, I think what parents will probably hear if they try to push for this is that there's no time in the day to teach these skills. And usually it looks like what I was speaking about with the ladder, which is like a quick 5-minute meeting with the student, or they bring notes on their behalf. And that's pretty much the capacity of schools right now for the most part, is just the pre-IEP meeting. If we're lucky, we'll get that. And I think, really thoughtful school districts who are interested in this, like you and I, that like are nerding out about this, could create a course. That's one option. Or in already existing special education spaces, whether that's, a lot of times schools have a resource room or an they call academic support, or some sort of small group space. That's another time that you could utilize some mini lessons on this curriculum. Or even if providers want to jump on board, like I know you'd be stoked to do this too, Charity, but like if the school-based counselors wanted to work on that too in their one-to-one sessions, that's also something that could be part of the IEP counseling goal, is IEP awareness and self-advocacy, and something they can do in their counseling time as well.
Which I just like love so much, because I feel like when we're thinking about transition planning and like kids in college or beyond or trade schools or like working, etc., they need to be able to have those skills even if they're not directly related to like academics.
1,000%. And I'm in the thick of research, so I don't have exact numbers for us today, but I will follow up with you once I'm done with my dissertation. But I think, largely students are entering college or another program not knowing what their disability was, not knowing what they had an IEP for, not knowing what an accommodation is or an evaluation. The schools, if they do go to college, which I know we'll talk about, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but I'll just use it as an example, that if they want accommodations, they have to do it 100% on their own. Colleges will not speak to families colleges will not speak to the family unless the student signs a release form. They need to submit paperwork, which includes the evaluation. They need to write a form that says, typically it'll say, what accommodations are you requesting and why? Like, why do you need this accommodation? And the amount of calls I get from my alumni students being like, I don't know how to do any of this. And like, we have failed kids if they don't know how to do that. So, we have to figure out how to find time in the school day to teach kids these skills, because they're going to college or jobs not knowing a thing. And it's frankly just, it's embarrassing. And, we want students to feel empowered and to know about their profile and advocate and feel comfortable to do that, because the research does show kids that access accommodations do better. So we have to have that in mind.
Well, and I think like that's the holistic piece to me, is like making sure that they are like so aware and that we're treating them as an equitable resource and support for their own education, right? And like I have like a visceral reaction to districts or to people or whatever that are talking about it, and they're like, oh, don't tell them about their IEP, don't tell them about their accommodations, like they don't need to know about their diagnosis, they don't need to know these pieces. And it's like, man, I would want to know, right? As like a fully developed human, like I would want to know if that's a conversation that people were having. And I also think that then takes away their ability to step up and engage in a way to like really empower them. And we already have kids that are struggling in school, right? Like we have so many teenagers that are like, I don't care about this. I don't want to be here. I don't want X, Y, and Z. And we know with learning disabilities and other forms of like, diagnoses that can sometimes like interfere with the learning process, that they're already experiencing barriers. So when we're not telling them, when we're not being honest with them about what's happening, and we're like not including them in these meetings, we are not engaging them in like truly a meaningful, impactful way.
Absolutely. And I think we're talking about visceral reactions. I've got a whole list for you, Charity, but I won't go through all of them. I'm definitely in meetings. I'm like, control your face. Control your face, Gaby. No, but the other pet peeve about like, this is one of my pet peeves, is teachers will, maybe a student does attend the meeting, and teachers and staff, even parents too, they're not perfect, will discuss the student in the third person while they're right there. So saying like, Charity's been doing a great job with the homework. I'm like, can we just talk to the student? I know it's awkward. You're giving them feedback, but like this is part of the process, and they should know that part of the process is actually really awkward. And how are you going to talk differently when it's to the kid? So many times I talk to school districts when we're working with families and we're partially rejecting IEPs, and I'm like, remember the audience of this IEP. This student is going to read this IEP one day. Would you write this and let a child read this? And schools are like, absolutely not, right? They're using words like aggressive behavior and defiant and obscene and, unmotivated. And I'm like, this is so not disability aligned. And I would never let my child read this because they're going to internalize this. And then they call you and they need multiple times a week of counseling to work on confidence and understanding because they've been so traumatized by this system. So the more we can involve them in the process, it reminds school districts what this is really about and like who's going to read this document to really figure out how to make it more strength-based, student involved to help build that confidence and advocacy.
Yes. No, it's such a fair statement though, because I feel like there really shouldn't be secrets in this process. And there also, if you can't, what is that saying? It's like how people talk about you in a room when you're not there is how they actually feel about you. And so I think too, like when we're talking about IEPs, we're talking about special ed, we're talking about accommodations. I know that there is like sometimes a high level of frustration about just do it, right? Like why can't this kid just do it? Or like why can't they just do it? Why can't my kid just like get there? And we would love that for them, but that's part of the process in incorporating like this team mentality in the IEP and in any sort of advocacy, because we want to get them there, wherever there is.
Of course. And I think the secrets piece is fascinating. I know something we might want to talk about is the work with families too, and I think that is the most frustrating piece. So I could only imagine being a student on top of it, let alone a family, to walk into a meeting or into a situation where you feel like there was a secret or that someone was talking about you behind your back. And I'm sure, oh my gosh, the amount of times students have been like, my plan is what now? Nobody asked me if I want that, or I don't actually want to do this, or this is not helpful for me, because schools are so used to a script or a menu, and they're not considering true individualized support. And I think that that's sort of like the secrets piece too comes up as like, schools are gatekeeping resources or not willing to be creative around what a student needs, and they can smell that in 5 seconds. And so if we're not bringing them to the meeting, we're already sort of, starting off on the wrong foot with the student. It's really, really hard to rebound with a student and with a family if they feel that trust has been broken. So not only will this help student outcomes later on, but I think trust is a huge, huge piece as well of this puzzle.
So let's talk about that, because I know one thing that we were talking about covering was kind of like how to collaborate, right, in the best way with all of these different players on the team. So I'm curious from your perspective, who should be the players on that team? And then how do we either start to facilitate good collaboration, or how do we fix it if there is something that has like gone wrong?
Well, so speaking logistically, I'll talk about the players and then definitely want to come in and to talk about what happens if we need to rebuild. But players at the table is sort of an easy question to answer for me, just knowing that the law sort of tells us that. So part of the federal law, IDEA, says to be a full team, you need to have the parent or guardian, any provider that works with the student. So school counselor, occupational therapist, physical therapist, whoever is on that IEP service grid, one special education teacher, one content teacher, anyone who needs to speak about the reports if reports were done, so somebody qualified to report out on that, and then one person that is the what we call LEA, local education agency, meaning there's someone in the district as a representative who can make official decisions about changes to the document because they have a sense of the budget and programming. And at 14 in Massachusetts, we also invite the student. Not required, but they're invited and it's up to the family. So that's the full team. That's a required group every time. Beyond that, a parent can bring anyone they want. So if they want you to come, Charity, they can invite you. You can come. They can send you the meeting link. You can come in person. If they want to hire an advocate or consultant, they can come. If they want to bring an aunt or an uncle, I have families that I work with that have a aunt in the picture as well that comes, or whoever it might be. Families can bring anybody else that they want. School can't say they can't bring anyone. The only caveat is if they do bring a lawyer, schools are entitled to bring their own lawyer. That would be the only sort of information. But that's the team, and they're required at every meeting. And then you think about the players at the table, then they're sort of like the invisible people that aren't at the table that it's good for families to know. I always, in my first call with families, I'm like, let's build the district organizational chart so you're aware of, like, I like the term players. I love that you said that. It's actually in a book that I read called From Emotions to Advocacy by Pam and Pete Wright. Highly recommend. And there's an entire chapter called The Players at the Table. You know, there's usually a district special ed director, and they're usually the ones that are pulling the strings. They're not often in attendance. From there, a principal might have some authority. And then even on top of that, you would have, right, like a superintendent or a school committee. So my biggest push is that they know who the district-wide special ed director is. That's an important person. They're often making a lot of the financial decisions related to special education. So it's good to know who that person is. You don't always need to include them, but it's good to just have their contact information in your back pocket.
Okay. So talk to me about outside providers, right? Like therapists, social workers, whoever, right? What have you seen as the benefit of having them as part of those meetings?
Great question. So I think there's a few reasons. First, this is sort of minor but important. A lot of times schools don't mean to, but they might try to put burdens on families to say, oh, you know, have you looked into outside resources? Have you done this and this at home? And trying to inadvertently, like, not blame family for the lack of progress, but put them on the spot to make sure they're doing their part. And so I think it first and foremost shows that families kind of covered their bases. They're doing everything on their part from the home front to support, so much so that we're going to bring our provider to this meeting, right? So we're going to utilize our own resources to bring our home team to show you what we're doing. So that's the first piece, is like it really shows family as being a collaborator, doing their part, carrying their weight to show to schools like we're in this together, we're a team. The second piece is they're biased in that they're there to support the student, but they're unbiased in the sense that they are not the advocate. And so a lot of times they can be less confrontational than an advocate because they're literally there to just share their professional opinion about their work with the student. That also shows the home piece, if that makes sense. So a lot of times, as I'm sure you know, kids present differently at school and at home, and this is like constantly a debate. And I'm sure you know it's like kids work so hard to keep it together at school, and then they're falling apart at home. And when parents try to explain what they see at home, schools are very dismissive. And they're like, well, they're doing great at school, so we don't need to do anything. But if you have an outside provider say, like, actually, family unit is strong, here's what's happening, and this is actually part of their profile, and they haven't generalized the skill yet. So I think we do need to do something at school because they actually haven't learned the skill. It comes across in a much better way to schools, and you can sort of speak the lingo in a way that a parent can't, similar to an advocate, where you can use the terms like coping skills and frustration tolerance and, you know, problem scales and zones of regulation, whatever you're using, like they will respond in a more strategic way than I think parents unfortunately have a hard time sharing, and they get very dismissive with families.
Yes. Which is fair. And I think that's one reason why I love to go to IEP meetings. And I really strongly believe that, like, any child or teen therapist who's working with them like should be in those meetings, even if it's not every time, even if it's just like once a year, like for a check-in, because there's so much information that sometimes you can share that you don't even know would be helpful unless you're part of that meeting. And then if we're not sharing that, we're missing out on potentially this entire lens of this kid. And like I do think that that's a huge part of like the holistic collaboration, is just making sure that like they have the necessary information. Even if like we don't think it's important, they might actually really benefit from it.
Yeah, and like why reinvent the wheel? So if you're doing something and having great success, tell the school, because they can do it too, right? So a lot of times I will encourage a family to sign a release of information giving permission for the outside provider to speak with the school provider. So for you, you'd be able to speak with the school counselor. If a student has, for example, a social emotional goal on their IEP, working on coping skills, and you've come up with a menu of coping strategies for the student that works, let's not put a goal on there to say identify coping strategies. They've already done that. Now it's about application, right? So you can now work with the school district to say, here's things that I found to be successful, and now we just have to work on the generalization piece. So you're really able to collaborate to reinforce things that are already working.
Right, for sure. Well, that's the piece about like making sure that everyone is on the same page, right? Because of course, like we also wouldn't want the kid to feel like nobody is communicating and that nobody is like having those conversations, because I do think for teens, they do get tired. They get tired of advocating sometimes. They get tired of like relaying the same information if they feel like somebody's not paying attention. And I think that is part of my focus when I'm part of those teams, is to really make sure that like I'm supporting what that kid is already advocating for, and that I'm supporting that conversation, that communication, so that I make sure it doesn't get dropped as part of my role.
So, no, I fully agree. And the amount of times that families just call me, Charity, to just be like, I'm spent. I know what my kids need, but truthfully, I'm just like emotionally exhausted. So I always talk to my families as advocate to be like, they always ask, how does this work? How do we partner? Do you talk? Do I talk? Do I do this? What do we do? And I very much am always like, listen, my goal is you become your own advocate, but also let's work together. So if you are at capacity, I'm happy to do 80% of the talking. I'm happy to do the emails on your behalf, or vice versa. I have families that are charged and ready to go, and I'm like talking 20% of the time and really coaching them behind the scenes. I do, though, get so many families and students that are just like, can you do this? They're just done. They're truthfully done. They're exhausted. Like you said, it's a part-time job to learn the lingo, to be able to have these meetings. Families are having to take off work. Students are getting pulled from classes to go to these meetings. It really is truthfully a part-time, and for some families, full-time job, depending on the student's profile. And I wish schools remembered that. I was just in a meeting today where a parent was in tears, and I'm like, you guys are forgetting to humanize this situation and how hard it is on families. Like, they come in, you don't have the relationship like you do with your counter colleagues in the district, where everyone knows how hard each other's working, and you don't really know what goes on at home. So it's hard to have that same empathy. But yes, there's an exhaustion piece for sure. It doesn't need to be that way, though.
Well, I was going to say, I can imagine, like, when you get parents in that are at that point where they're like, I'm spent, I can't do this anymore, that there is already a disconnect at the base layer of the team where the trust isn't there, the collaboration isn't there. And so how do you, like, help support that parent and reconnect them with the district in a way that, like, does provide collaboration?
Yeah, I know I wish that I had an answer that parents could do this on their own. So I will be transparent that my answer does involve having an advocate. But I'm going to think more strategically on how a parent could do it independently, because I always tell my families, I'm like, this should be a service provided by the state. You shouldn't have to pay for advocacy. Everyone should be entitled to a second opinion in a person. But I recognize it's an expense. So for all your families and stuff that are listening, I don't want them to feel like, oh, if you can't afford an advocate, you can't do this. So I do want to think about ways you can do this without an advocate. But with an advocate, bridging the gap. Super important that families are really clear on their concerns. And they might need a little bit of questioning from an advocate to kind of break it down, to be like, okay, you're concerned academically. Let's dive into that a little bit more. Is it homework completion? Is it sustaining attention? Is it a curricular skill like reading? Well, within reading, what is it? Is it reading out loud or comprehension? So really getting super specific on the concerns is paramount, and always putting that in writing. That's like huge step one, and sending it before a meeting can be incredibly effective for a school team, because then they can see that there's no surprises. They have time to process and do their internal job of speaking to who they need to speak to. Maybe that's a district director, the invisible person, right? And they're coming in more prepared, and families don't feel put on the spot, because almost every meeting is going to say, parents, what are your concerns? So just know they need to have that ready to go. That's step one. And then I think the biggest thing that I like to remind my families, the IEP meeting, I look at it as like a collaborative think tank. We are there to like share ideas, to understand each other, to develop and draft ideas. If a disagreement comes up, the IEP meeting is not necessarily the place to try to resolve differences, even though the law tells us it is. But we need to know the system. So it's often that special ed director that's telling the other person that's running the meeting, say no to this, say yes to this. So really, we're not going to get anywhere. They've already made up their mind. So if there is a disagreement, try to take it offline and use corrective measures. So get the school to just document the disagreement, and then we work together after to strategize. That could be a meeting with the district director. It could be sending in a letter. It could be requesting more testing. It could be filing a complaint, which I don't recommend. I don't do a lot of these measures, but they're there. You can request mediation. So we do that outside of the IEP meeting. You don't want to beat down the providers at the table. And I see this happen all the time. Parents get frustrated, and then it feels like it's coming across to the teachers, who are bending over backwards. They really are trying, and schools are totally under-resourced and understaffed. So we want to keep the meeting creative collaboration, document differences, and then handle that outside. And sometimes the best advocacy comes from asking the right question. That is like, if I could just give one piece of advice to family, it's like, instead of stating your concern about a proposal that was made, ask a question. My goal in every meeting is that they 100% understand the school district's perspective on why they rejected something or why they proposed something. And then they don't have to decide in the meeting. They don't have to decide. We can do that later. You get 30 days to sign the document. So really, the goal of these meetings is like think tank action. Ask questions, learn, listen, record, and we handle everything else another time.
I love that so much, because I think that part of the hustle and bustle with like the IEPs is that there feels like there's this unspoken pressure of like, we have to decide, we have to sign this has to be real, right? And I do think, like, I was talking to someone who's going to be on the podcast, who was great, who was talking about her main thing was just like to slow down, right? Like, nothing needs to be decided today. Nothing needs, like, there's no fire, right? Like, there is like a maybe theoretical fire, right? But it's like, we're containing it. We're working on it, right? Like, we're aware of it. We're, working through it. But to just really slow down and know that, like, we're not trying to get into a pressured situation with like deciding right now, right? And I think it's so cool that you talked about how like we're trying to almost like separate the tasks, right? Of like, our task here is to think, our task here is to really understand and to be curious about like why recommendations are being made. And then we're going to have some of these conversations in different components, like dyads, triads meetings, to really like make sure that we're addressing any interpersonal thing, that we're addressing any emotions that come up, right? Because there is a twofold thing, and I think they're both important, right? So if you feel as a parent, for instance, that you were like really disrespected by someone on your team, that could be an important thing to clear the air, right? To like make sure that there isn't that like animosity towards like somebody else on the team. But that may not be the time to duke it out in front of like 16 other people while your kid is sitting there also being like, what is going on? And why is this here? We know that there are lots of like limitations in terms of time and energy investment, whatever. So I appreciate your guidance in terms of like, let's really focus. Let's like be this think tank. Then let's think about it and really figure out where we need to go with it. And after we've had that initial emotional reaction to something, I often think we're more in a space to be able to think rationally and cognitively about something that has been proposed because we've allowed our emotions to work themselves through.
100%. And I do have families that I love to say, my goal is that you fire me because you're able to do this on your own. So I do have families that eventually have built that skill, Charity, where they can process their emotions and advocate successfully for their child. But I do want to give families the benefit of the doubt that what we are asking is an almost impossible task. To be able to be disrespected in a meeting and to have me say to them, ignore that comment, it's a huge burden that I'm asking families to do. And that is why I want to be creative, and I'm writing my homework down to think about, what do you do if you can't afford an advocate? If there's already been lack of trust, right? Because that rebuilding piece is where the advocate comes in. So I definitely want to creatively think, and, you can have a follow-up newsletter or something, but it's really important sometimes to have a third party. I think just quickly, if they do have a family member or somebody or a provider that would be willing to come, it's hard for me to think of what to do without a third party. But having a third party, somebody who's neutral, to come in to help with the rebuilding is life-changing for a lot of families. They can come in and be like, wow, I was anticipating that being terrible, and it was actually positive. They'll call and be like, that went way better than I thought. And in my head, I'm like, the school's totally still screwing up. But the family feels it was effective because we were able to do what I said, right? Talk, collaborate, understand, listen, feeling like the parents are heard. That is the goal of every meeting. So even if you don't get what you wanted, if you walk away feeling heard, understood, and that you also understand where the school's coming from, then we can figure out the lack of resources, the money, all the other things that the school's going to tell us why they can't do something. We cannot move forward unless everyone understands where the decisions are coming. But that is also a really hard thing. So many schools are going to come in with guardrails and lack of transparency, so it sounds easy what we're talking about, but some school districts make it much harder than others. Some are more willing to be transparent, lay it out, and do this work. But it is possible. It can happen. And really, it shouldn't be this hard, truthfully. Every time I come out of a tough meeting, I'm like, that was not necessary. But, we all are in this unfair system together. And we really have to work as a team. And that's the best IEPs and teams I've seen, is when they truly allow that to happen.
Well, and I think that we're all stuck in a system that we know is just really not working in modern day, 2026. And I think that being able to recognize the limitations of our educational system and being able to recognize that we are, slowly hopefully moving towards something that's a better fit. And if that's where we're at right now for this kid, that's where we need, because we're all trapped the same way. I can talk all day about how the mental health system is pretty fucked, right? But I'm also still a part of it, and I'm still providing treatment, and I'm still advocating for better. And so I think it's existing in a system of yes and allowing for us to just be humans together at the table, to be I know this is perfect. And I think being creative is it's such a flex when you're on an IEP team, to be let's just play around with this and see what we can do to really help this need get met.
I think though, just having this conversation just reminds me my next or first book, rather, Charity, will just be about trust, because hearing you talk and say all these things, I'm like, well, when we think about the system from both sides, the school members are scared, to be honest, because they're worried they're going to get fired, or they're worried they're going to say something out of compliance. And then families are scared because they don't know what to ask or how to ask. So it's just, everybody's walking in with fear. And I think the more that you build trust, the less worried people are about making a mistake or tiptoeing, because that's huge. Because yes, when I work with schools, are there things that schools shouldn't say in meetings? For sure. There are things that, you're agreeing to do this, right, without knowing your resources. If you say in a meeting that you think the student needs a one-to-one, well, now you've proposed the one-to-one. So, but instead, could you say, I feel like this student needs different support. I'd love to hear from people what they've found to be effective. Can we talk about strategies that we've seen that have been effective? Oh, frequent check-ins are really helpful. Or it's helpful when this student has private check-ins, and then we talk okay, well, how can that be executed? So it's this curiosity. I love you use that word, curiosity, and really being student focused and humanizing as much as possible, because then everybody feels more comfortable to share. And that's like the thing. And really it's helpful if like the person running the meeting can set the tone. And that, you know, I've been that team chairperson, so I really, the people listening, I don't want, you know, folks to feel like that person carries the burden. In some ways though, they do set the tone. They're the ones that like navigate how the meeting will run and who will speak. And that's why sometimes having an advocate can be helpful, because they can engage other team members. And that's the best meetings, is when the team chair actually doesn't talk. And respectfully, they're there to facilitate. They don't work with the student, and so their job is to like get the conversation going, right? Like every IEP meeting should be like a podcast, Charity, where they're just like getting people to talk, right? So, and they're just like in the background facilitating. And now you have like the parent, the outside provider, special educator, like everyone's like, well, what about this? Well, actually, I don't know about this, and that worries me. I wonder about this. Like that's what you want to see in a meeting. And really it has to come down to trust, knowing we're in this together for the student. You're not going to get fired. We're not going to tattletale. But also, I have expectations for my kid, and I need to be heard, and I need that to be addressed. Like, how can we creatively problem solve here? I know you have limited resources. I know you're spent. There is a way to do things differently, not necessarily more. We can work smarter, not harder, right? All of these good things. We can do all that together.
Well, and I think you landed on this space that's like so important, is like being a provider and a teacher as part of these conversations. You have to really just put the defenses down, because like nobody's going to be able to have these like really open, well facilitated conversations if everyone is defensive and like argumentative. And it makes me think about like some of the meetings I've been a part of before, where the schools are like, oh, like this is going to be a fight, this is going to be a rough IEP meeting, right? And to me it's really interesting, because I'm just like, does that showcase their lack of ability to navigate difficult conversations and conflict? And that's a piece that I'm like, but you're the school. You should be like able to have all of those different conversations and hold all this in the same umbrella. In the same way, like I'm very much a yes and person, in terms of like, yes, this sucks and there's a way through it. And like we can have all these feelings at the same table. But I think when we're talking about trust, it's like, if you don't feel like you're going to be seen or heard or supported, why on earth would you come in a vulnerable space? And I think that's a piece with IEPs where I would want to make people feel like they can be vulnerable in these meetings, that they can really put their fears and concerns on the table. Because at the end of the day, we are helping to prep their kid, that client, for like the rest of their life in terms of education. And like it starts
And
now.
if we can't do it as adults, then how the heck is the kid gonna be? Yeah, right? Like but you know, you were talking about something, and it really was like, you know, you're signing yourself up for another job, Charities, like to work with schools. I don't think they have any training on how to have difficult conversations. So also give them that. Like I will say, like there's no training when I was a teacher or administrator. Zero training on how to talk to families. Zero training on how to have difficult conversations. Zero training on how to handle disagreements. It was something that became innate to me, but I very much was in meetings with advocates that were also pretty rough and didn't do the greatest things. And now as an advocate, I'm in meetings where the ones running it don't have that skill set, and it can just totally derail. So, you know, that's not what gets scores and accolades from outside resources. So nobody's investing in professional development on that, because people don't see that. But, you know, that's a whole topic for another day, which is like, how do we prepare schools to have these difficult conversations? How do we make sure teachers and schools are taken care of too, so that we can come into these meetings like fresh, with an open mind, having everyone's best interest? But we're all coming stressed, frazzled, and with this unfair system. So truthfully, sometimes it just takes saying that in a meeting. We recognize this is totally unfair. Let's see what we can do, right? Or like, we know you guys are working your butts off. I think we still just need to adjust this plan a little bit. I know that might be asking for more work. We're here to do what we can do to pick up the slack when we need to. So the more you can like make these statements and sentence frames in meetings to acknowledge the other side, you're educating them so that they do the same for you, for the parent, to say, I know you're probably tired, families, but we would love you to do XYZ. So they're going to learn through your own modeling. So as a provider, or for advocates that are listening, like by modeling what this looks like, they will learn, and they will start to then be able to transfer that to other meetings as well. And that's why, again, one day, Charity, you and I are going to have like free advocacy services, because it makes everybody happier. Like, schools sometimes are like, oh, great, Gabby's coming, she's going to resolve this. They don't want tense meetings. Nobody wants to go to a tense meeting. So, you know, we'll get there.
I was gonna say, I think that, like, I try to remember and think about the fact that, like, nobody wants those stress meetings. No one, right? Like, we want to roll into our jobs, and we want to feel confident, and we want to feel confident.
Yes.
We want to achieve the things we're there for. Like, nobody wants to leave feeling like they had to fight, or that they failed, or like whatever those pieces are. And I know we have to wrap up in a few minutes, but I do see future things for us as the collaborative partners, and I'm very excited about
school
that.
coaching. Yeah.
No, like, seriously.
Yes.
You know, and it's because, like, a lot of the things that we're talking about, they don't exist, which is why I think you created Lotus Advocacy, because you're like, this needs to exist in the way that I want it to. And, like, that's my piece with, like, Teens Uncharted, is like really creating something that doesn't exist, because I can see the need and the benefits, and, like, I just want everyone to be happy clams in the pond.
100%. And I got off a tough meeting, and I was like, that did not need to be so tough. And I truthfully was like, I wish I could have just called that team chair to, like, coach them through it, because it just made everyone's job so difficult. It didn't need to be. And I know she had the best interests of the school and the student, but it just did not come across okay. And I had very upset families, and they weren't even willing to, like, listen to the fact that they made a mistake, and here's how we move forward. So I do think there are small things that schools can do to really set the tone, and things that families can do to shift the narrative and, you know, lead by example to get schools to follow. I think we can get there. I've had really, really beautiful teams work together, and those are the ones that have the most success. They're the ones that fire me but still have me come to meetings just for confidence. They're the ones whose students have, like, transitioned from substantially separate to full inclusion, or are graduating from college if that's their move, or, you know, making more money than I did as a first-year teacher in a trade program. So the ones that have success that I could tell you about are because there was a trusting and collaborative IEP meeting. So I really think that that's the way that we can do some small things to move the needle for kids.
Yes, and I think too, just to wrap up too, is like you had said that one of the things that's really helpful sometimes is to just acknowledge that, like, this sucks, right? And we're here, and we're sorry, and it sucks, and, like, how do we work through it? And I think that is one of the strongest pieces you have in your arsenal, because when you can acknowledge someone's feeling, when you can acknowledge the stuckness, when you can acknowledge that this doesn't feel fair and that it's hard, you're gonna get everyone being like, oh, yeah, you get it, thank you.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. It's like small little things that we can say, pausing before we speak, really just trying to listen, to understand, curiosity. It will make a big difference for everybody. Mental health, and then also progress for the student.
Yeah.
Which is the goal, right? We're not going to sing Kumbaya and hold hands, but I know that might be the goal down the road. But it's like, it should feel like at the end of a meeting. It should not feel like I need to go cry or take a break or hide in the closet, which families have shared with me before. So it should feel like you've accomplished something, you felt successful, you can move on, we're moving forward. That's the biggest thing, is like forward movement for the kid. We're all on the same page. Okay, we're starting a revolution.
Oh.
When do you want to talk next to start this revolution? I'm ready for it. I'm just kidding.
We're revolution pending.
Happy IEP meetings. That's a new thing. Happy IEP meetings.
Seriously, I mean, 2025 or 2026 is the year of the horse. So that is like this really strong, driven alignment with like where your kind of innate like cause is. So there's lots of things that are lining up. So check back in 2026 and we have it coming.
Sounds great. This was awesome. It was so great to chat with you, Charity.
Yes, you as well. Thank you so much for coming on. I have so many other questions I have for you, but we'll have to save it for another time.